Yes, unless they attack us, we leave them alone, for though every man is trained to arms and can fight if need be, we are a peaceful folk, who cultivate the soil from generation to generation, and thus grow rich. Look round you, is it not a scene of peace?" We stood up in the boat and gazed about us at the pastoral prospect. Everywhere appeared herds of cattle feeding upon meadowlands, or troops of mules and horses, or square fields sown with corn and outlined by trees. Village folk, also clad in long grey gowns, were labouring on the land, or, their day's toil finished, driving their beasts homewards along roads built upon the banks of the irrigation dykes, towards the hamlets that were placed on rising knolls amidst tall poplar groves. In its sharp contrast with the arid deserts and fearful mountains amongst which we had wandered for so many years, this country struck us as most charming and indeed, seen by the red light of the sinking sun on that spring day, even as beautiful with the same kind of beauty which is to be found in Holland. One could understand too that these landowners and peasant farmers would by choice be men of peace, and what a temptation their wealth must offer to the hungry, half savage tribes of the mountains. Also it was easy to guess, when the survivors of Alexander's legions under their Egyptian general burst through the iron band of snow clad hills and saw this sweet country with its homes, its herds and its ripening grass, that they must have cried with one voice, "We will march and fight and toil no more. Here we will sit us down to live and die." Thus doubtless they did, taking them wives from among the women of the people of the land which they had conquered, perhaps after a single battle. Now as the light faded, the wreaths of smoke which hung over the distant Fire mountain began to glow luridly. Redder and more angry did they become while the darkness gathered, till at length they seemed to be charged with pulsing sheets of flame, propelled from the womb of the volcano, which threw piercing beams of light through the eye of the giant loop that crowned its brow. Far, far fled those beams, making a bright path across the land, and striking the white crests of the bordering wall of mountains. High in the air ran that path, over the dim roofs of the city of Kaloon, over the river, yes, straight above us, over the mountains, and doubtless, though there we could not follow them, across the desert to that high eminence on its farther side, where we had lain bathed in their radiance. It was a wondrous and most impressive sight, one too that filled our companion with fear, for the steersmen in our boats and the drivers on the towing path groaned aloud and began to utter prayers. "What do they say?" asked Leo of Simbri. "They say, lord, that the Spirit of the Mountain is angry and passes down yonder flying light that is called the Road of Hes to work some evil to our land. Therefore they pray her not to destroy them." "Then does that light not always shine thus?" he asked again. "Nay, but seldom. Once about 3 months ago, and now to night, but before that not for years. Let us pray that it portends no misfortune to Kaloon and its inhabitants." For some minutes this fearsome illumination continued, then it ceased as suddenly as it had begun, and there remained of it only the dull glow above the crest of the peak. Presently the moon rose, a white shining ball, and by its rays we perceived that we drew near to the city. But there was still something left for us to see before we reached its shelter. While we sat quietly in the boat, for the silence was broken only by the lapping of the still waters against its sides and the occasional splash of the slackened tow line upon their surface, we heard a distant sound as of a hunt in full cry. Nearer and nearer it came, its volume swelling every moment till it was quite close at last. Now echoing from the trodden earth of the towing path, not that on which our ponies travelled, but the other on the west bank of the river, was heard the beat of the hoofs of a horse galloping furiously. Presently it appeared, a fine white animal on the back of which sat a man. It passed us like a flash, but as he went by, the man lifted himself and turned his head so that we saw his face in the moonlight, saw also the agony of fear that was written on it and in his eyes. He had come out of the darkness, he was gone into the darkness, but after him swelled that awful music. Look! A dog appeared, a huge red dog that dropped its foaming muzzle to the ground as it galloped, then lifted it and uttered a deep-throated bell-like bay. Others followed, and yet others; in all there must have been 100 of them, every one baying as it took the scent. "The death-hounds," I muttered, clasping Leo by the arm. "Yes," he answered, "they are running that poor devil. Here comes the huntsman." As he spoke there appeared a second figure, splendidly mounted, a cloak streaming from his shoulders, and in his hand a long whip which he waved. He was big but loosely jointed, and as he passed he turned his face also, and we saw that it was that of a madman. There could be no doubt of it. Insanity blazed in those hollow eyes and rang in that savage screeching laugh. "The Khan! The Khan!" said Simbri, bowing, and I could see that he was afraid. Now he too was gone, and after him came his guards. I counted 8 of them, all carrying whips, with which they flogged their horses. "What does this mean, friend Simbri?" I asked, as the sounds grew faint in the distance. "It means, friend Holly," he answered, "that the Khan does justice in his own fashion, hunting to death one that has angered him." "What then is his crime, and who is that poor man?" "He is a great lord of this land, one of the royal kinsmen, and the crime for which he has been condemned is that he told the Khania he loved her, and offered to make war upon her husband and kill him if she would promise herself to him in marriage. But she hated the man, as she hates all men, and brought the matter before the Khan. That is all the story." "Happy is that prince who has so virtuous a wife," I could not help saying unctuously, but without meaning, and the old wretch of a Shaman turned his head at my words and began to stroke his white beard. It was but a little while afterwards that once more we heard the baying of the death-hounds. Yes, they were heading straight for us, this time across country. Again the white horse and its rider appeared, utterly exhausted, both of them, for the poor beast could scarcely struggle on to the towing path. As it gained it, a great red hound with a black ear gripped its flank, and at the touch of the fangs it screamed aloud in terror as only a horse can. The rider sprang from its back and, to our horror, ran to the river's edge, thinking evidently to take refuge in our boat. But before ever he reached the water the devilish brutes were upon him. What followed I will not describe, but never shall I forget the scene of those 2 heaps of worrying wolves, and of the maniac Khan, who yelled in his fiendish joy and cheered on his death-hounds to finish their red work. End of Chapter 8 of Ayesha, The Return of She, by H. Rider Haggard. Read by Lars Rolander.